Leon Trotsky was a very famous Russian indeed, a key figure in the Bolshevik Revolution, in the foundation of the Red Army, which successfully repelled the foreign invasion of Russia, which sought to overthrow it.
He even found time to be the godfather of our next guest, Michael Hudson, professor of economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and the author of Super Imperialism, the economic strategy of American empire. I'm glad to say he joins us now. Professor, let's clear up this first point. Whilst never a follower of Leon Trotsky, I do know a fair bit about him. He was, of course, Jewish by culture and tradition, but he was an atheist. How did he end up as your godfather?
Well, my family were also atheists. I was born in Minneapolis, and Minneapolis was the only city in the world in the 1930s that was a Trotskyist city. And my father and other Trotskyists went down to Mexico and worked with Trotsky there. And as a result of my father and mother being there, she was pregnant with me. He said he would be, I guess, whatever the socialist equivalent as a godfather is, but the English language doesn't have words for a godfather of people who don't believe in God. So we used the closest word that was in the English language.
Well, I'm glad we've cleared that up. Trotsky's reputation might be enhanced or might be damaged by having been a godfather whilst being an atheist. But more importantly, you grew up to be a very considerable intellectual indeed, and something of a powerhouse on the issue of imperialism. So you didn't necessarily stray far from Trotsky's path in this. But super imperialism is not a phrase I've heard before. Kindly explain that thesis.
Well, when the word super imperialism was used already in the 1920s. I wanted to call my book monetary imperialism because that's how America achieves its world position today, through finance. But the publisher at Holt Reinhardt had gone to school with a Stalinist who wanted to use the word super imperialism. So I used that word, and that means a unipolar world, not a competition among empires like England and France, but a single unipolar United States sucking in the whole world into its own economic area, largely by financial control, largely by using the dollar as a financial instrument to control other countries, financially, not militarily.
But they're not short of military intervention and power, of course, as a belt and braces strategy. But that period you describe was historically very brief, wasn't it? From the fall of the Soviet Union to the rise of China and its alliance with Russia. The unipolar period has now passed.
I'm hoping it will, and if it does pass, it's going to be because of de-dollarization. And in order to understand how it's passed and what it is that's passing, you have to understand what actually was put in place that Russia and China and other countries are trying to protect themselves from and break free of.
It's voluntary, though, this dollarization, isn't it? I mean, nobody has to deal in dollars. It's a bit of a surprise that it's not over already.
Well, that's exactly the point. The strange thing is, when I wrote the book in 1972, right after the United States went off gold, everyone thought the United States was losing its power. The largest buyers of the book were the CIA and the Defense Department. And I was immediately hired by Herman Kahn at the Hudson Institute, a national security institute, to explain to the government how imperialism was working. And they looked at it as a how to do it book. And the funny thing is that it was read much more on the right than on the left.
Well, China, for example, they could, in an instant, de-dollarize the world, right? Are you anticipating this move?
They're already trying to minimize their holding of dollars. They only use dollars to intervene in the foreign exchange market to stabilize their exchange rate. They know just exactly what's happening. And in fact, my book has sold 40,000, Super Imperialism has sold 40,000 copies there. More than it's sold in the English language. And there's a new edition coming out in Chinese, just as the American third edition is coming out also.
So you obviously speak of new currencies. The one major new currency that pops to mind is obviously the cryptocurrency. Is Bitcoin going to play a big role in this? No. You
I can't imagine. Not really. I don't see them being more than keeping your money in Andy Warhol etchings or something else. It's not a political currency, and certainly not a means of settling balance of payments deficits and the military spending that causes the balance of payments deficits. And that really is one of the points of super imperialism, is the U.S. Balance of payments deficits ever since the Korean War in 1951 has been military. So when people talk about the dollars being pushed into the world economy, that's U.S. military spending that's doing it.
So the dollar is mightier than the sword in maintaining American hegemony in the world. Is that your thesis?
That's the basic thesis, yes.
Even though they've got so many swords and spend so much money on it?
That's just backup, just in case other countries won't play the American game and try to go it alone and try to essentially create a socialist type government that's an alternative to finance, or that won't let American financial companies come in and take control of their economy.
Now, I hate to go back to your godfather, but looking back now, how far have you strayed from that path? Do you describe yourself as a Trotskyist? If you are, you're one of the few that's ever been on British TV.
Well, it's not on the DNA molecule. Trotsky never really wrote anything about economics at all. So there's nothing really Trotskyist about my ideas. And finance is not neither left-wing nor right-wing in character. So I guess you'd say I'm a classical economist. Adam Smith, John Stuart Mill, and of course, classical economics ended up with Marx.
Finally, Joe Biden has or had announced a stimulus package which would change the face of America, rebuild your crumbling infrastructure, give a handout to the middle class, which is what you call the working class in your country. None of that has survived. The so-called stimulus package is now just a Christmas box for American capital.
That's exactly right, and that's what it was meant to be from the beginning. The genius of a politician is to say something that appeals to the voters so that he can deliver the voters to the campaign contributors. And the campaign contributors of the Democratic Party are the oil and gas industry, the coal industry, and he's given the oil industry the rights for offshore drilling, to increasing the fracking. So basically, the United States says we're against any environmentalism that Europe is having. In fact, we don't want Europe to buy low carbon gas from Russia. We want you to buy high liquefied natural gas from the United States. Go for coal, go for U.S. oil. That's really the message that you've had in Congress in the last week, and that's what's replaced the rhetoric of his proposed rebuilding. The job of a politician is to deliver his voters to the campaign contributors that I've mentioned.
It's been a long road, Professor, if you think about it, from Trotsky's role in 1917 through the War of Intervention, the building of a Red Army, all the way to you talking with me in 2021, 100 years after the War of Intervention. Are you optimistic? Do you see the future in socialist terms, or do you think capitalism has won?
It has to be socialism. The original idea of capitalism, industrial capitalism 100 years ago, was that it was going to evolve into socialism. It was going to develop more and more government subsidy of the economy, more and more government infrastructure to provide to employers at a low cost. That hasn't worked. There's been a counter-revolution. The rentier interests, the landlords, the financial interests have fought back, and capitalism is so debt-burdened that the economy in the United States and much of Europe, certainly in England, cannot go forward as long as there's so much of a debt overhead, a debt burden, and so much privatization. So China is simply doing, in a socialist way, what the United States, Britain, and Germany did in their industrial takeoff. China's just following the same policy that originally was industrial capitalism evolving into socialism, but it's gone directly into socialism. And so it's basically achieved a more efficient economy. The West is not an efficient economy to have a real estate bubble financed by debt and to have a financialization of industry and corporate industry. That is that leads to a dark age, as it did in Rome. Oligarchies taking over are not very good at surviving.
Professor, thanks for taking a spin with us on board the Sputnik.
Well, it's very good to be here, George.